Philip Mantle is a long-standing UFO researcher and author from the UK. He was formerly the Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association and the MUFON representative for England. He's the founder of Flying Disc Press and recently released a new book titled Introducing UFOs, A Young Person's Guide, and he joins us now. Hi, Philip.
Good evening, Dean. Nice to speak again.
Same here. I was reading through the part of the book Introducing UFOs, and I thought, what a wonderful idea, going through, decade by decade with the major UFO incidents that happened during those decades, and you're targeting them towards a particular audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I'd wanted to work on for quite a while, Dean, but never got the chance. But then, of course, we had the good old COVID lockdown. So I've run out of excuses then. I had to get it finished. But the basis of it is myself and colleagues who are around the same age group, or even slightly older. I'm 62. We've long discussed, who's the next generation of UFO researchers, and can we help them? So we've got all that experience and so on, which we can share. But I remember going back to when I first started, Dean, which is 40 plus years ago. There wasn't that much to lay your hands on then that you could say, right, these will learn me the basics and get me up and running. Hence, introducing UFOs was my idea of how to do that. It's not telling you what to do. It's giving you the ideas and some information. It's aimed at, I would say, like a teenage audience, high school. I can still remember high school myself. I would have loved something like this. So it's not too text dominant. So you don't have to troll through pages and pages of literature. And there's lots of photographs and illustrations and photographs. And I'm hoping that it also kind of prompts you to think for yourself. That's why at the tail end of the book, we've got a number of ideas of what UFOs may or may not be. So I'm not going to dictate to you what things are. So it's to get you up and running, really. And I'm very pleased with the way it's turned out.
So give us an example, the way you've structured the book.
Yeah, so we go through, we have a beginning, an introduction to the subject and where it all started. And like you said in the introduction, we go through it a decade at a time. We'll start with the 1940s, right the way through to modern times, and we'll pick out some of the main cases. Obviously, we've got to put things in like Roswell. But there's also a few cases that, in my opinion, have been forgotten about, even in mainstream ufology. For example, from your home country, the incident on the plains, the Nullarbor Plains with the family. And I remember that being a big story at the time. And I think I managed to recover a couple of the newspaper cuttings that did it at the time. But you never hear it mentioned anymore. So I wanted to also put a few cases in that perhaps weren't obvious or in your face. And then what I also did, I went round colleagues in different parts of the world, told them what I was working on. And I said, do you have any photographs that in your opinion are the genuine article, photographs of UFOs?
Right.
So again, there's the well-known ones like, Paul Trent back in the 50s. But there's others that perhaps even I hadn't seen, certainly from Europe and Turkey and places like that. But again, at the beginning of the section, there's a whole photograph section in the middle of the book. There is a fake UFO photograph from Project Blue Book. And basically what I'm saying is, look, not everything is what it appears to be. So again, think for yourself. So we have a nice photo. I'm just biased that I like looking at photographs.
Right.
Dean, I used to do a bit of photography, and I think it stirs your imagination as well. So hopefully that will stimulate whoever reads the book into thinking, well, yeah, it's a subject I'd thought about getting myself involved in. Perhaps now I will. or then they might look at it and thinking, oh no, forget it.
Right, right. Is there like a good cross section of like, I guess, standard UFO sightings, and then did you kind of cross over to the abduction area?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned the obvious ones like Betty and Barney Hill, because it's a standout case, but I think it needs to be in there because a lot of what has happened when you're studying just the abduction phenomena all began with Betty and Barney Hill. I was fortunate enough to correspond with Betty. I never managed to meet her in person, but we did the days when we used to write letters to each other, Dean, and she shared a few insights in her letters to me. So I think it was an obvious one, and a well-known one as well, of course. And it's one that even today is still talked about, still debated about. A bit like Roswell. I mean, Roswell will never die. We'll continue to discuss it, and so it seemed an obvious case to put in there, and of course, it's been fully illustrated by a colleague and friend of mine, Ronald Kinsella, and we've done some. Ronald was given no brief, just here you go, one for each decade, and it doesn't have to be exact. And I think you come up with some very original artwork that, again, what I hope will help stimulate the imagination.
Yeah, yeah. Ronald, of course, he's a former experiencer himself, but he's also a very accomplished science fiction writer.
Yes, and I'll be publishing a non-fiction book of Ronald's next year. So he seemed the kind of obvious choice as far as I was concerned. You know, he's experienced the phenomena firsthand. He is an artist and illustrator. So, you know, what better way to do it? And just give him a free hand and let him go.
Illustrations and images, I think, are so important when putting together a UFO book because an image can tell someone a lot, not as it was actually happening, but people can make up in their own mind what can happen, and it kind of stimulates that part of the brain.
Well, I don't know about you, Dean, but I remember they always say, you know, a picture paints 1,000 words.
Yeah.
When I was a lad, of course, there was no internet. And the first thing I used to do when I picked a book up was leaf through it to see where the pictures were. And so I am biased. I think you'll find certainly in the books that I write, there are as many visuals in there that I can get, you know, artwork, photographs, documents, newspaper cuttings. I mean, you name it, it's in there. And I think I've tried to push that over into the other authors that I've worked with and published their books to say, well, what visuals have we got that we can use for this book? Even if we haven't got that many, perhaps we can find find some, you know. So I'm biased, but I agree with you. Yes, I like to look at the pictures.
You mentioned the case in Australia. Of course, most of us, or all of us, would know the major cases here in the United States. But what about, you mentioned countries like Turkey? Is there a case there that people might really find fascinating?
Well, it's not so much Turkey, but one of the photographic cases in the photo section is from Turkey. And I think one of the main researchers in Turkey is called Haktan Akdogan. I've probably pronounced his name incorrectly, so I do apologize. But I've known Haktan for many years. I've met him several occasions. I even had him as a speaker at one of the conferences I organized here in England. So he seemed to be an obvious choice. And he sent me some UFO photographs that I'd never seen before, and they're in the book. But a famous case from the 1970s, it's probably well known in mainstream ufology, but outside of that, probably not, is it comes from Iran. These were the days when the Shah still ruled Iran, and it was an Iranian jet fighter, and its interception of a UFO, I think he tried to fire on it, and all his instruments malfunctioned, and he actually watched this UFO even go down to land. And in recent times, the pilot, whose name escapes me, so you'll have to apologize, has even been interviewed in person, which is quite remarkable. But this was a top-line fighter jet at the time. You know, this wasn't a Sop with camel biplane held together by balsa wood and string. You know, it was top of the range. They were well trained, And of course, we have documentation about it as well from the United States. So you have first-hand eyewitness testimony, you have documents. So it really is a fascinating case. But Iran is not the kind of country we associate with UFO sightings. So the reason I put things like that in as well is to show the young people that UFOs are not only happening in your own backyard, it is a global phenomenon.
Yeah. One section in the book is devoted to letting people know what to do when they see a UFO. So what kind of advice did you give there?
I mean, again, Dean, I've been a UFO investigator for decades. And the amount of times I've interviewed people and they've said, oh, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that. And so I'll give some pointers. If you think you are, having a UFO sighting, most of us nowadays, for example, have a mobile phone that's got a camera. Well, use it. Yeah. The amount of people I've spoken to, Dean, have said, oh, I have my camera, and I never thought to use it. That, if you've got some kind of visual aid, binoculars, use it. Note the time. That's always important, how long the sighting lasts for. If there's anyone else around you, perhaps draw their attention to it as well, and say, hey, excuse me, Mr. Bit, can you see that? What do you think it is? So all little pointers what to do, little simple things that any of us can do when we think we're making a UFO sighting. And they're not, rocket science, it's just straightforward, simple thing. The timing of it, remember where you were. So if I go to investigate the sighting, you can say I was stood exactly here and I looked over that building and it was 3:45 p.m. on whatever date. And this gentleman next to me, I happened to be at the bus stop or the train station. He too saw it, and I've got his name and his mobile phone number. So you can give him a ring as well. Just simple things like that. You might think it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but again, it's just born out of experience. The amount of people have said, oh, I never thought to do that. Well, there you go. That's just a few little pointers.
That's exactly the same response I got when I interviewed a MUFON investigator not long ago. And I said, why isn't there more physical evidence, visually with these UFO sightings? And he said, people just say, I completely forgot to get my phone out. I just didn't think about it at the time. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, just simple pointers. That's all they are.
So a UFO book aimed at a younger audience. Have you thought about maybe, contacting schools and maybe having a copy of the book in their library?
Yeah, there actually is a publication here. I believe it's still online, but it's all about books for schools. And I actually sent them a copy because what they do, they review them. They review the books online, and then I think a lot of schools are sort of linked to this particular organization. They will look at the reviews and then they'll think, well, maybe we should order some of those. But I never heard back from them, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But they do have a physical copy. I emailed them first in advance to say, is it okay if I send one? They said yes. So I did send one copy. I've thought about sending one to my former high school. I wrote my first UFO book back in 1994, and I'd been left school then 20 years, but I did ring it. I mean, my high school was hopeless, Dean, and I got the headmaster was a tyrant.
Right.
And I asked if the old headmaster was still there, and the secretary, she must have known him because she kind of laughed. So he said I'd never amount to anything. I just want to send you a copy of my first book. So I did send one to my high school and have them put it in the school library. So maybe I might send them one. You never know.
Yeah. So the book available on Amazon and through
Amazon. Yeah, it's in paperback and Kindle formats around the world. It's also out in Spanish. So we've published it in English and Spanish together. Early next year, it's been translated into French, possibly German as well. So hopefully it'll go around the world in many different languages.
All right, change of tact. I wanted to talk to you about this the last time we spoke. One of my favourite bands during the 70s was a band called Hot Chocolate, and they had some great songs, but few people, in fact, I'm not sure anyone would realise that one of their big hits in the early 80s was a song about a UFO.
Yeah, I mean, it was led by a singer called Errol Brown, a black gentleman, marvelous voice. They were extremely popular, and I believe that song was their biggest seller if you take in worldwide sales. No doubt about it. And it's about a flying saucer landing. And if you see the pop video that goes with it, you know, they weren't that great at that time, but it's all about a flying saucer landing. Errol Brown singing, he saw it, and there's no doubt about it. And, you know, I remember the song. I remember Hot Chocolate, you know, they were very good, very popular. I think Errol Brown died a couple of years back. And it kind of, I thought, well, I wonder if there's anything to this story. Just by chance, I saw on social media, a gentleman mentioned that he wrote the song. So I thought, I wonder if he knows anything behind the story. So I managed to contact him, and he's called Steve Glenn. And Steve said, yes, Philip, but you know, I did write it. And he's an Englishman, he's a Brit. And he told me the story that he wrote lots of songs for a lot of popular singers in the 70s and 80s. He was also a performer himself. He even had one song go to #1 in Japan. I've seen the video.
Okay.
It's cringeworthy, but fair play to the guy, you know. And he said, so I asked him the question, you know, was any truth behind this? Did Errol Brown and Hot Chocolate really see a UFO? He says, no, I did. Me and my partner. Can't remember his songwriting partner's name, so you'll have to excuse me. And he said, Hot Chocolate had nothing to do with it. He said, we were actually on the way to the recording studio in London with another band. He said, we were in the car in the front and the band were in a van behind us. When we saw this thing coming down, we pulled over to the side of the road. There's traffic everywhere. And he said, this object fired these smaller objects out at them. So they literally ducked down out of the way. And he said, when we got back home that night, he said, it was the quickest song I ever wrote in my life. I wrote the whole song in about 10 minutes.
Wow. And
it became a worldwide smash hit for Hot Chocolate. And when they did the press about it at that point, Errol Brown was briefed to say, yeah, we saw it, man, you know. But in reality, I had nothing to do with it at all. Now, what is interesting, because this UFO was actually on the ground, another book I've written in lockdown, but I'm going to publish next year, is called UFO Landings UK. And the story of this is going to be in it. It's one of the dozens of cases we have in the book. So I out of courtesy, I emailed Steve and said, look, I've written this new book. Your sighting is going to be in it. Your landing case, I should say. And he said, that's great, Philip. He says, let me know when you've got a publication date. He said, maybe we'll re-release the single in time for the book coming out. And I thought, isn't that marvelous? And he also said, how about a UFO musical using all the songs of Hot Chocolate? So I thought, well, if they can do it with Mamma Mia, why not? And Steve is still very active in music. Dean, I'll give you an idea what he's still working on. Before lockdown started, he told me the story where he worked in a nightclub during the 60s, and they had what you would probably call call girls, but they were given a different name in this nightclub. They were actually called letter girls, and of course, this nightclub was frequented by politicians and sportsmen and all kinds of things. So he's actually written a musical called Letter Girls. He has cast it. He's written all the music for it. He's done record. It's all set and ready to go. And then the COVID thing hit. So he's still working away on that. And from a UFO point of view, I've been working with a UK production company, and they liked my UFO landings book. so decided to make a documentary about it.
Okay.
So I've been interviewed, and I put forward 3 cases from the book to be used in the documentary, one of which is Steve Glenn's. And they were in the process of booking a time to go and interview him when, you know, lockdown came again. So they can't, that's on hold at the moment. So you may see Steve Glenn on camera telling the story as well. And I'd look forward to seeing that myself, never mind anyone else.
Yeah. Is it a mainline documentary? Will it be seen like on the network channels?
Oh yeah, I mean, it'd certainly be on Amazon and other sites. Where else I can't say at this moment, but I've done my piece for it. Mine's filmed.
Yep.
They've interviewed one of the witnesses for it, and there are 2 more to go. And again, like Steve's account, the other 2 who are both in the book, again, are not the kind of thing that you would see spoken about at lectures and conferences. They are fascinating cases in their own right, and are quite unique as far as television is concerned. So hopefully at some point when we're let loose again, because England's just gone down into a lockdown as of midnight tonight. So hopefully we'll get that finished in the new year sometime.
Fantastic.
And all that will be on it, Dean.
Yeah. Just going back to Steve's sighting, I mean, I was reading your notes on that, and I mean, if that happened over here, it would have been a major UFO event. I mean, the craft itself, it was big as a football field?
It was very big. It was on the ground. It's in a busy part of London. And again, it's one of those things that Steve talked about. I interviewed him on the telephone. I've not met him in person. Was he fully expected it to be a big news event because of not, you know, the location, but of course it wasn't, and that baffled him, I think, as much as the sighting did himself. And I've come across that time and time again. When interviewing people, they said it's a busy area, broad daylight. I've sat down to watch the local evening news, expecting it to be all splashed all over, and nothing.
Right.
And I said, well, there must have been other witnesses to it. And he said, well, there was hundreds. And
did he get the military or police involved?
He phoned the police. The police actually came out because there was a public phone box nearby. We still have them, I think. Yeah. And so he got in the old phone box and he phoned the police, and the police did actually come out. But by the time they arrived, there was nothing to see. But the police did turn out. And it kind of, when we're just talking about a few pointers about what to do during a UFO sighting in those days, phone the police.
Yeah.
And because they are still, I believe even today, duty bound to come and take a look. But obviously by the time they get there, more than likely, whatever's being observed has been and gone.
Yeah. It sounds like one of those weird cases you probably hear in a place like South America where the smaller craft came out and started dive bombing the crowd. Yeah,
it reminds me of some of the birds at the seaside who dive down and steal your chips.
The seagulls, yeah,
the seagulls. And so when he talked about it, all I can see is seagulls diving down, stealing people's chips.
Yeah,
because that's what it kind of reminded me of. Or some of the birds who, of course, will dive down to keep you away from their nest. If they're protecting something and just trying to shoo you out of the way. So that was just an impression that went into my head. But it's like you say, it's not something I've heard a lot of, Dean, if ever. It is a very peculiar case. And of course, in Steve's line of work, to him, the obvious thing to do was sit down and write a song about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we might think that's not the obvious thing to do, but he was a good songwriter, worked with some big producers at the time, lots. Cliff Richard was another of his clients who he'd written songs for.
Susie Quattro.
I mean, you name it. Some big names in the 70s and 80s.
And he also later on wrote another song, I think UFO related, for the legendary Roger Daltrey.
Yes, Yes, absolutely. I mean, the lead singer with The Who, one of the biggest rock bands in the world and still going, of course.
Hmm.
I think Roger's got a picture of Dorian Gray in his attic somewhere because he seems timeless to me. But so he's doing well.
Yeah.
So yes, he did. He wrote another one. I can't remember the name of it, but it's obviously had an impression on him. I think the other one might have been a work of fiction. I'm not sure, but this one was definitely based on what they saw that night.
Right.
And it might be interesting to see when we get rid of this COVID if he does follow it up with a musical. But I will notify him when the book comes out and see if he releases the song again.
Be looking forward to it. Philip, always fascinating speaking with you, full of knowledge and information.
Well, my pleasure, Dean. My pleasure.
Well, I'm sure we'll be catching up again pretty soon. In fact, when the next book comes out, we'll talk again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dean. I look forward to it.
Philip Mantle joining us.